And thank you for coming. I mean, this in a way is one of the most significant talks because of the significance of what's happening on May 25th. It's an issue of the first rank moral importance. And we've got to do everything we can to win the coming referendum. I'm not going to introduce Finola Bruton because that will be Breda O'Brien's job, but I'll briefly introduce Breda, who I think is known to you. But Breda has been a patron of the Iona Institute right since we got going in January 2007. So we're going now for 11 years. So we're building up a little bit of a track record. Breda, of course, has been a columnist with the Irish Times or a columnist generally for about 20 years now. And I think in the Irish Times since about 1996, yeah. So a veteran columnist, you might say. I've been around 24 years writing for the paper, so the two of us have a combined 44 years writing for the newspapers, so it's not nothing. I was still hanging on in there. And Breda, of course, by day is a teacher, and as a teacher is able to track the changes in society in minute detail, and has seen it up close and personal, so to speak. So I'll hand you over to Breda, and she'll introduce Finola. Thank you.
Thank you. I think when David is saying that I'm a veteran, he's trying to tell you that I'm old. But no, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and it's a particularly great pleasure to be introducing Finola. But before I do that, I do have to make a plug. There isn't one for everyone in the audience, but we do hope that everyone in the audience will buy one. This is David's latest book, which has the provocative title of How We Killed God and Other Tales of Modern Ireland, and it's really worth buying. They can be got down there for the minute price of €15. So it's a great read. And you know, David was talking about how I'm, you know, whether I like it or not, chronicling the changes in Irish society by seeing them in the lives of young women. But David has actually chronicled a huge amount of change in Irish society in this book, and the changes that have come about. Yeah, for many of you, there's really no need to introduce Finola. She has, when I think, I was delighted to be asked to introduce her, because when I think of Finola, I think of one word, and that's integrity. She's somebody who has always, in a quiet, honourable way, known what she has stood for and has been willing to take the flak for what she stands for. And she also is a person of tremendous compassion. Way back when, she was involved working and living with homeless girls, and then later on with Ally, which was an organisation which worked with young single mothers. So she's not a person who actually just steps back from the fray and pontificates. She has put her money where her mouth is, and she continues to give service in so many ways, in every way from being, you know, chair of her local Dunboyne Parish Council and a member of the Board of Management and on the board of the Coombe and the board of Intercom, and in so many ways she gives so much. And does it all with a grace, you know, an ability to state her truth quietly and clearly without being antagonistic. And to me, she is somebody that I greatly admire, and I really, like you, I'm really dying to hear what she has to say on this issue, because as David says, this is the issue. It's beyond contemplation to think of what will happen to our culture if we don't manage to retain the eighth, the kind of corrosive effect of actually taking a human right out of the Constitution. But I won't speak to you about that. I'll ask you all to welcome Finola. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. One of us, why we must continue to protect the unborn. May the 25th may well mark a turning point for this country. There is effectively only one question before us. Do we or do we not introduce a liberal abortion regime into this country? This is not about some sing-song, repeal the 8th day out of the polls. For the most part, this is an agenda-driven, ideologically led, media and youth-focused attempt to allow for the extinction of the lives of thousands and thousands of our most vulnerable human beings before they are allowed to be born. The rare cases upon which some pro-choice advocates build their case are really no longer the main issue. What is being proposed is beyond all expectations and has disturbed many middle-of-the-road citizens. 2 leading female journalists, whom I heard on the radio, have unequivocally and chillingly stated that they accept that there is a baby in the womb, but that that baby's life must be trumped by a woman's right to choose. At least one could argue they are accepting what many others will not accept, and that is what advances in science have been incontrovertibly telling us for some time now. It is that we can no longer talk about a mere bunch of cells, that often before a woman even knows that she is pregnant, there is a beating heart and a rapidly developing little body, a little boy or a little girl. This referendum is therefore challenging us as a society to look at our basic moral vision and to examine our attitude to the value of human life. It is making us ask ourselves the most fundamental questions of all. What does it mean to be human? Are only some humans to have the most basic human rights? The breathtaking proposals that our legislators are envisaging, aided and abetted by the media, are at last stirring that still small voice of conscience in many who have up to now been slumbering in a fog of moral ambivalence and misplaced, if well-intentioned, compassion. I was taught nearly 40 years ago that there were 2 sorts of moral vision. The first one saw human life as a spectrum from the moment of conception to death. At every point on that spectrum, life is equally sacred. There can be no exceptions or justifications or obfuscations. We cannot modify it in the interests of other values. It is undoubtedly, and we have to concede, a difficult path to follow, and often in the case of abortion, demands a heroism that none of us can honestly guarantee we could deliver with certainty. In other words, we don't know, in spite of our genuine and authentic respect for the unborn, how any of us might react in difficult circumstances. That fact, however, does not alter our take from the pro-life commitment to the unborn baby, which we believe is truly human. So powerful are these commitments and beliefs that remarkable courage, real and genuine courage, has been the hallmark of many pro-life groups here in Ireland and around the world, and in particular of the members of the Iona Institute headed by David Quinn. The second moral vision, calls for compromise in moral situations. The individual views morality as something that pertains primarily to themselves and their own situation. Some pro-choice feminists will say that they wish that abortion was never necessary, but that women are often the victim of circumstances. Accordingly, they advocate that they must look out for themselves, and if others get hurt or die, then it is really not a woman's fault. To sober this thought process up, to make it sound acceptable, language is changed, new moral codes are invented. Subjective concepts and feelings, inherently vague anyway, replace the notion of basic human rights. Old wine is rebottled, and compassion is invoked to justify all and sundry. Who could ever have thought there was so much of it about? We are by now well used to these linguistic developments. We have debated most of the arguments. We depend on a subtly biased media to put forward our simple but uncomfortable and threatening views on the sanctity of all human life and on the human right of all unborn babies. There are some issues that I would like to put out for further discussion here this evening. These issues are difficult. They are ones on which people have different but often implicit and unstated values. But if this is to be an informed and democratic debate, these values need to be made explicit and discussed openly. When it comes to constitutional rights, are all rights equal? Is the right to life inferior to the right to bodily integrity? What is our understanding of humanity? Who is human and who should have human rights? If we are a society that values life, do we accept that the taking of life will leave emotional scars afterwards on those involved in that decision? Should we not acknowledge this openly before we change our constitution? As a society, we proclaim our belief in equality as one of our fundamental values. So how can we reconcile that with removing the equal right to life of the unborn from our constitution? As a society, we agree that our policies should be child-centred. If so, how can we justify leaving the interests of the unborn child out of consideration to abort its life? As a society, we insist that fathers, as well as mothers, take responsibility for the welfare of their children after birth. If so, how can we say that fathers should count for nothing in a decision to end the life of one of their preborn children? None of these are easy issues to discuss. They can generate anger and hurt and sincere disagreement. I offer my own views on these questions here and ask those who take a different view to tease out the arguments with me and to share their values with me so that we can move forward in mutual understanding and respect. There are 3 issues that I would like to develop for further discussion here this evening. The first issue which has been pushed out of this debate is the long-term consequences of an abortion for the mother herself. Regrettably, some of the dismissal of these effects by professionals, doctors and psychiatrists over the last few months has been patronising. It really is a bad reflection on their profession. Yes, it is true that some people can bury these doubts in the long and in the short term. However, for many others, the consequences have been catastrophic. When I worked as a counsellor, I have been, for better or for worse, a witness to a number of these traumas. They are not experiences that one would wish to see repeated. The terrible guilt, the awful grief, the desperate, if futile wish that all could be reversed, if only they could go back. Yet at every desperate mental and emotional turning, they are told that what they did was for the best. And more harshly, that it was their choice, so move on. Yet in my experience, no one can move on from something that they suspect might not have been the right decision without confronting that decision and acknowledging that they may have made a mistake. To forbid women to do this is to place an intolerable burden on their already heavy shoulders, and they often have to carry that burden alone for the rest of their lives, fearing the hostile, judgmental admonitions of an oppressively businesslike sisterhood. Our modern culture is a harsh environment for anyone struggling to come to terms with what they sincerely believe to have been an act of destruction, however pressurised or reluctant that decision may have been. This is a real and genuine medical health aspect of the abortion debate. Yet for all the talk of the health of women over the years, the often long, tortuous road that a post-abortion woman has to travel is relegated to a footnote or is simply not spoken about at all. We might well ask, is this not, in some respects, an echo of the past? This aspect of her mental health, this constant suppression of a guilt that she may feel, this turning away by those women who have led the pro-choice argument, is, in my view, something that we as a society ought to challenge. It's interesting that on the one hand, we encourage women to open up about their abusive past, about the trauma of a deprived background, about the loss of their childhood. We suggest that they speak of their adoption experiences and have sought government help for them to seek out their birth mothers. We have commissions and tribunals and even a weekly television programme on long-lost families, but we do not want to hear from those who regret an abortion. It seems as if all this compassion and concern is selective and sometimes self-serving in that it suits other agendas. And we dismiss the hidden distress of those who now find themselves truly alone. Is closure to be only for the chosen? Are the rest to be deleted from memory? Is this because it does not suit the narrative? The second issue that I would like to raise is the gender issue. It's really extraordinary that our very vocal feminist journalists and academics seem blind to the fact that half of those babies they wish to allow to be aborted in Ireland are girls. How do they reconcile this with their notions of equality of treatment? Their own sisters are to be sacrificed on the altar of choice. Their mothers too, because in time to come, this also will happen. Drunk on the power of choice, it would seem that all human life is expendable. If we begin by extinguishing the life of the child in the womb, then all rights ultimately fall. Some argue that a life can justifiably be extinguished if it is not viable. If life is not capable of being lived independently, is that a justification for suppressing it? We are getting into very dangerous waters here. What of all of us who one day may not be capable of living independently? The pro-abortion advocates like to dismiss this as scaremongering, but the logic is inescapable. That debate is already underway, shelved for the moment, one step at a time. The right to life is the first and most fundamental of all human rights, without which there can be no others. One cannot exercise any other human right if one is not allowed to exercise the right to live. We cannot say this often enough. Without being allowed to be born, one can have no civil rights, no free speech, no right to bodily integrity. We must not forget that this drive to repeal the Eighth Amendment is about taking away a constitutional right that is there already. This is unprecedented. The history of our Constitution is that additional rights have been conferred either by amendments or judicial interpretation. This is the first time in Irish history, to my knowledge, that a constitutional right is being taken away. A profoundly utilitarian view of human life is determining our ethical and moral understanding of what it is to be human. The third issue concerns the role of men in the abortion debate, or to be more accurate, the non-involvement or the non-engagement of the fathers of our unborn babies, and the distancing of many husbands, and indeed older men, from the whole issue. It's an irony that 40 years ago, men were able to walk away scot-free from any responsibility towards their pregnant girlfriends. The feminists railed furiously against this, and with justification. Today, in an open and free society, where women are visibly involved in every walk of life, where more than 1/3 of all births are to single women, where DNA testing can establish the paternity of unborn babies, it seems as if men have vanished off the face of the earth. We catch an occasional glimpse of older men or younger husbands in newspaper reports muttering about this being a woman's issue. No, they will leave it up to the women. We have anecdotally heard about others in the shops and in the pubs, in our local chemist, or from their wives no less, that it is to do with women's bodies, and God forbid that they should interfere. The same women who complained all those years ago about men getting off the hook are actively encouraging them to stay out of this and mind their own ... business. My body, my choice. There are, however, sadly, another group of men for whom the silence must be deafening. The fathers who wish to take responsibility for the children whom they have fathered and are as yet unborn. The fathers whose DNA makes up 50% of that of all unborn babies. The fathers who long to hold and nurture and cherish their children are forced to stand aside, or worse, accompany their girlfriends on a life-ending voyage. For them, it's truly a question of what's his baby too is her choice only. His baby, but her choice. Where is the equality in that? Is this not discrimination? It is almost impossible for those souls to speak up as they are knocked down instantly by a battery of by now culturally ingrained ideologies and prejudices that only belong in the domain of the female gender. We need to hear those male voices. We need to support them if and when they can speak. They need to know that not all females will drown them out. They too have an ownership, insofar as it goes, of what happens to that child they helped to create. And they too have rights and responsibilities. What are the basic beliefs of the Irish people? Advocates of change in the last referendum on marriage equality relied on two basic concepts to make their case. These were equality and opposition to discrimination. And as we know, a majority of the Irish people agreed with them. It is notable that in this referendum, many advocates of change, of repeal, are not making their case on the basis of equality or on an opposition to discrimination. This is no accident. What they are advocating now is inherently discriminatory. They want our Constitution to discriminate against an unborn human life. They do not believe that an unborn human should have a right to live, ever to see the light of day, to breathe air into its own lungs. What concept of equality will the Irish people be endorsing if they vote yes to repeal the Eighth Amendment? It would seem that a very inconsistent version of equality is being granted to those who cannot make their voices heard, but denied to those who cannot. We had another referendum recently on children's rights. That referendum was child-centred. We were told that our existing constitution was insufficiently child-centred and needed to be amended to make it truly child-centred. We were told that this was necessary so that the constitution would reflect the values of modern Ireland. There has been no such child-centred approach in this debate to repeal the Eighth Amendment. It is not child-centred at all. The child is a forgotten entity. There has been no focus, no emphasis, no mention of the unborn baby at all in the Oireachtas report. It is far from child-centred. In fact, since the Eighth Amendment was inserted into our Constitution in 1983, the only focus has been on the mother. Her choice, her rights, her health. That would have been fine if it had been balanced with the beauty and wonder and health and safety and rights and sanctity of the unborn baby. Sadly, 30 years of neglect, 30 years of the active cultivation of choice over life, 30 years of talking only about the woman has led us to this referendum. In light of the proposed legislation which the government is framing, there is another question that must be asked. What will happen when a child in the womb is on the cusp of viability at 23 or 24 weeks? The government has indicated that at this point the baby will be delivered alive rather than killed in the womb first. But is this really what a humane society does? When a baby is this premature, there is a high risk that the baby will be disabled precisely because it is so premature. How could any government contemplate such a thing? And who will look after this baby if the mother doesn't want to do it? Will the baby be put into state care? Or will some heroic family step forward to adopt the baby? What will happen just before viability, say at 20 or 21 weeks? The Committee on the Eighth Referendum heard what happens in Britain. The baby in the womb is paralysed first, and then poison is injected into its little heart. How can any humane society do this? What happens to the corpse of the baby? We know that in Britain, thousands of fetuses, aborted and miscarried, have been disposed of in hospital incinerators. Will we do that? If not this, then what? Could a mother bring the body home? What would she do with it? I would like to know the answer to these questions. The Irish people need to know the reality of voting yes. And how can it be acceptable that the baby in the womb can be a bunch of cells at 11:30 on a Tuesday night and a human being at just past midnight on the Wednesday morning? These are some of the hard questions that the pro-repeal side have not so far answered. But they are the questions that we, the Irish people, must all ask on and leading up to May the 25th. I cannot conclude without making reference to another area being neglected in this debate, and that is the topic of adoption. Why has it gone out of fashion? Because out of fashion it has gone. I have spoken to young people and they say, "Oh, I could never give my baby away." It seems easier for many to extinguish its little life instead. Fidel Mahili-Eames' initiative, Adoption Instead, that she launched very recently, is a welcome development in this debate. Of course, the sad reality is that it can never come back to ask why it was let die. Yet many, as already mentioned, are haunted by bitter regret after making such a decision. An adopted child offers a peace, even if tinged with great sorrow, that an aborted baby can never offer. Adoption exists under our law, and it is child-centred as distinct from adult-centred. It's a child-centred solution to a non-wanted pregnancy. There are many other aspects of this debate upon which discussion is needed. Unfortunately, the media conversations have been largely in and around procedures and political fallout. We need to insist on being given time to deal with what essentially this referendum is all about. A baby, a defenceless little boy or girl, a human being whose life we believe is worth more than a mere choice. This human being is truly one of us, as the billboards from the Iona Institute around the country remind us. If the Irish people vote yes, there will be no going back. That is the history of abortion everywhere. We ask the Irish people to vote no, to reflect on the life-ending consequences of voting yes. There is and can be no fudge here. It's ultimately either yes or no to the destruction of precious human lives. For Ireland, this is the most fundamental social justice issue of our times. Thank you.